The sound of my water valve shutting off echoed across the morning air like a gunshot. Sheriff Karen was standing 50 yards away, her radio crackling with panicked voices from her department. Her face went from confusion to rage to something I had never seen before: pure fear. She reached for her weapon, then stopped when she saw my lawyer standing beside me with a briefcase full of legal documents. That was the moment Sheriff Karen realized she had made the biggest mistake of her corrupt career. She had tried to steal my land, but I had just turned off her entire world. My grandfather bought this land in 1952 with money he saved from working double shifts at the steel mill. 40 acres of rolling hills, thick oak trees, and the most beautiful natural spring you have ever seen. When he handed me the deed on his deathbed, he made me promise to never let anyone take it from our family. "This land has been good to us," he whispered, his weathered hands gripping mine. "It will be good to you too if you protect it." For 23 years, I kept that promise. I ran a small landscaping business from the property, using the spring water to keep my equipment clean and my plants healthy. Every morning, I would walk the fence line with my coffee, listening to the birds wake up and watching the mist rise from the pastures. This was not just my home. This was my sanctuary. The spring was the heart of everything. It bubbled up from deep underground, creating a small creek that wound through my property before flowing toward the county water treatment plant. My grandfather had told me stories about how Native Americans used to camp near that spring hundreds of years ago. The water was so pure that we never needed to filter it. We just drank it straight from the source. My neighbors knew me as the quiet guy who minded his own business and helped out when someone needed a hand. I had built a good life here. Simple, peaceful, and honest. I paid my taxes on time, kept my property clean, and never caused trouble for anyone. But that peaceful life started cracking the day I heard about the pipeline project. It began as whispers at the hardware store and rumors at the diner. A major oil company wanted to build a pipeline through our county, carrying crude oil from the northern states down to the refineries in Texas. The project would bring jobs, they said, economic development, progress. I did not think much about it at first. Our county was full of farmland and empty spaces. Surely they would route the pipeline around the residential areas and family properties. When I called the county office to ask about it, the clerk was friendly and reassuring. "Do not worry about it, Mr. Thompson," she said. "Your little property is nowhere near the proposed route. You will not be affected at all." That conversation should have been the end of it. I went back to my normal routine, tending to my business and enjoying the quiet rhythms of rural life. But something felt different in the weeks that followed. There were more official-looking vehicles driving down our country roads. Surveyors with equipment appeared in fields where I had never seen them before. Then came the phone calls from neighbors. Property owners along the main highway were getting visits from company representatives, offering to buy their land for double what it was worth. When they refused, the offers got more aggressive, more insistent. I should have known that my peaceful life was about to end forever. Sheriff Karen arrived at my front door on a Tuesday morning in March, flanked by two deputies I had never seen before. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and mirror sunglasses that never seemed to come off her face. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, and her gun belt creaked when she walked. Everything about her screamed authority and control. "Mr. Thompson," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I need to discuss some legal matters concerning your property." She thrust a thick folder of documents at me without waiting for an invitation inside. The papers were filled with legal language I did not understand, but the words eminent domain and public necessity jumped out at me like warning signs. This pipeline is going through whether you like it or not, Corinne continued, her voice flat and emotionless. The county has determined that your property is essential to the project. You can cooperate, or we can do this the hard way. I looked at the papers, trying to make sense of what was happening. But they told me my property was not affected. They said the pipeline was going nowhere near here. Corinne's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. Plans change. The engineering team decided this route is more efficient. Your spring feeds into the county water system, which makes this location strategically important for the project. That was when I realized this was not just about the pipeline. This was personal. Corinne was not just a sheriff enforcing the law. She was a woman with her own agenda, and my property was standing in her way. I am not selling, I said, handing the papers back to her. This land has been in my family for 70 years. You cannot just take it. Corinne's expression hardened. She stepped closer to me, close enough that I could see my reflection in her sunglasses. Mr. Thompson, I think you misunderstand the situation. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. The legal process has already begun. She turned to leave, then paused at the bottom of my porch steps. Oh, and Mr. Thompson, I will be keeping a close eye on this property. We have had reports of suspicious activity in this area, drug trafficking, illegal weapons. You never know what we might find if we have to come back and search the place. The threat was clear. Cooperate or face the consequences. After they left, I sat on my porch for an hour, staring at those legal documents and trying to understand how my quiet life had suddenly become a battleground. I called the county clerk again, but this time her tone was different, colder, more distant. I am sorry, Mr. Thompson, but you will need to speak with your attorney about those matters. I cannot provide any information about ongoing legal proceedings. I did not have an attorney. I had never needed one, but it was becoming clear that I was going to need one now. The next few weeks brought a parade of harassment that would have been almost comical if it had not been so terrifying. Corinne, or one of her deputies, showed up at my property every few days, claiming they were conducting routine welfare checks or investigating reports of unusual activity. They searched my outbuildings without warrants, claiming they smelled marijuana. They ran the license plates of anyone who visited my property. They even stopped my mail carrier and questioned him about what kind of packages I was receiving. Each visit ended the same way, with Corinne reminding me that the legal process was moving forward and that resistance was futile. The message was clear: sell now or lose everything later. The county board meeting was held in a cramped room above the fire station, with folding chairs arranged in crooked rows and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I had prepared a 3-minute speech about property rights and family heritage, thinking that surely reasonable people would understand my position. I was wrong about the reasonable people part. Board Chairman Williams barely looked up when I stated my name and address. The other 4 members sat with their arms crossed, staring at their phones or shuffling through unrelated paperwork. When I began speaking about my grandfather's legacy and the importance of protecting family land, Williams cut me off. Mr. Thompson, this board has already reviewed your case extensively. The pipeline project serves the greater good of our community, bringing jobs and tax revenue that will benefit everyone. Your personal attachment to the property, while understandable, cannot override the economic needs of our county. I tried to explain that no one had ever consulted me about alternative routes or compensation packages. I mentioned that the original county clerk had assured me my property was not affected. I even brought up the questionable timing of Sheriff Corinne's sudden interest in my land. That was when things got ugly. Are you suggesting that Sheriff Corinne is not performing her duties properly? Williams asked, his voice rising. Because that sounds like a serious accusation to me. I looked around the room and noticed something I had missed before. Corinne was sitting in the back corner, still wearing those mirror sunglasses indoors. She was not officially part of the meeting, but she was clearly part of the process. I am simply saying that the timeline seems convenient, I replied. First, I am told my property is safe. Then suddenly, it becomes essential to the pipeline. Then Sheriff Corinne starts harassing me with illegal searches and threats. Williams slammed his gavel down hard enough to make me jump. This meeting is about eminent domain proceedings, not wild conspiracy theories. The board has made its decision. Your appeal is denied. As I walked out of that room, Corinne intercepted me in the hallway. This time, she was not alone. Two deputies flanked her, and their hands were resting casually on their weapons. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think we need to have a more serious conversation about your future in this county." They escorted me to the parking lot where Corinne opened the back door of her patrol car. "Get in," she ordered. "Am I under arrest?" I asked. "Not yet," she replied, "but that can change real quick if you do not start cooperating." The ride lasted 20 minutes, during which Corinne explained the new reality of my situation. The pipeline company had influential friends in the state capitol. The local judge was up for re-election and needed campaign contributions. The county attorney had a son who worked for the construction firm handling the pipeline project. "Everyone has a reason to want this project to succeed," Corinne said, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Everyone except you." She pulled over at a remote intersection and turned around to face me. "Here is what is going to happen, Mr. Thompson. You are going to sign those papers, take the money they are offering, and find somewhere else to live. If you do not, I am going to make your life very uncomfortable." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Corinne smiled, and it was the coldest expression I had ever seen. "It means I am going to find drugs on your property, or illegal weapons, or evidence of tax evasion, or maybe I will discover that you have been threatening county officials. The specific charges do not really matter, do they? What matters is that fighting this pipeline becomes more trouble than it is worth." She let me out of the car at my driveway and drove away without another word. That night, I sat in my kitchen with all the lights off, wondering how a simple property dispute had turned into a criminal conspiracy. I thought about my grandfather's promise and the 70 years of family history tied to this land. I thought about the spring that had sustained us through droughts and hard times. But mostly, I thought about Corinne's threat and how completely alone I was in this fight. My neighbors had stopped returning my calls. The local businesses where I had been a customer for decades suddenly seemed uncomfortable when I walked through their doors. Word had spread that I was fighting the pipeline, and nobody wanted to get caught in the crossfire. The isolation was almost worse than the threats. Almost. Desperation has a way of making you smarter than you think you are. With nowhere else to turn and no one left to trust, I started spending my evenings at the county courthouse, digging through public records and property files that dated back to the 1800s. The courthouse stayed open until 8 o'clock on weekdays, and the elderly clerk, Mrs. Patterson, took pity on me after I explained that I was researching my family history. She showed me how to navigate the filing system and pointed me toward the water rights archives that most people never bothered to examine. "These old records are fascinating," she said, pulling out a leather-bound ledger from 1952. Your grandfather was quite thorough when he bought that property. Most folks back then just worried about the surface rights, but he made sure to secure everything underground too. That was the first piece of the puzzle. My grandfather had not just bought 40 acres of land. He had purchased complete water rights to the natural spring and everything that flowed from it. According to the original deed, those rights extended far beyond my property boundaries, following the underground water table for miles in every direction. I spent the next 3 weeks learning more about water law than I ever wanted to know. I discovered that water rights in our state operated under the prior appropriation system, which meant that older claims took precedence over newer ones. My grandfather's 1952 filing made him one of the senior water rights holders in the entire county. More importantly, I learned that those rights were transferable, defensible, and absolutely ironclad under state law. The second piece of the puzzle came when I started researching the pipeline company's environmental impact statements. Buried in the technical appendices, I found detailed charts showing their water usage requirements for the construction and operational phases of the project. They needed massive amounts of water, more water than the county treatment plant could provide during peak construction periods. The charts clearly showed that they were planning to tap directly into the natural spring system that originated on my property. But here is the part that made my heart race. They had never filed for water rights permits. They were simply assuming they could use the water because it eventually flowed into the county system anyway. They were wrong about that assumption. I made photocopies of everything and started building a file that would have impressed any lawyer. Property deeds, water rights certificates, environmental impact reports, county board meeting minutes, and construction timelines. The more I researched, the clearer the picture became. This was not just about my land. This was about controlling the water supply for the entire pipeline operation. Corinne and her friends had identified the spring as essential to their project, but they had never bothered to check who actually owned the rights to that water. The third and final piece came when I met Harold Westbrook at the diner on a rainy Thursday morning. Harold was a retired attorney who had moved to our county 5 years earlier, seeking the same kind of quiet rural life that I was fighting to preserve. "I could not help but overhear you talking to Mrs. Patterson about water rights," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I spent 30 years practicing environmental law before I retired. Mind if I take a look at what you have found?" Harold reviewed my files with the intensity of a detective examining crime scene evidence. After an hour, he looked up at me with something approaching amazement. "Son," he said, "you are sitting on the legal equivalent of a nuclear weapon." He explained that my water rights were not just valid, they were superior to any claims the county or the pipeline company might make. Under state law, I had the absolute right to control, limit, or completely shut off water access to anyone downstream from my property. "If they want to use your water for their pipeline," Harold said, "they have to negotiate with you, not the other way around." For the first time in months, I smiled. Harold became more than just a legal advisor. He became my strategist, my mentor, and the closest thing I had to an ally in a county full of enemies. We met twice a week at his cabin, always after dark, always with the curtains drawn. "The key to this whole operation," Harold explained, spreading maps and legal documents across his kitchen table, "is documentation. We need to prove exactly how much water they are using, when they are using it, and how dependent their entire operation has become on your spring." He helped me file the official water rights claim with the state environmental agency, a process that involved more paperwork than I thought possible. But Harold was thorough, and he knew exactly which forms to submit and which bureaucrats to contact. "This is not just about asserting your rights," he said. "This is about creating an official record of those rights that no county judge or sheriff can dispute." While we waited for the state paperwork to process, I began the surveillance phase of our plan. Harold had recommended a company that sold water flow monitoring equipment to agricultural operations, and I purchased several devices that could measure exactly how much water was flowing through my property at any given time. Installing the monitors required some creativity. I had to hide them well enough that Karen's deputies would not notice them during their frequent harassment visits, but position them strategically enough to get accurate readings from the main flow channels. The work had to be done at night, using only a small flashlight and wearing dark clothing in case anyone was watching. I felt like a spy in my own backyard, but the adrenaline kept me focused and determined. The monitoring data revealed exactly what we had suspected. During normal operations, about 4,000 gallons per day flowed from my spring toward the county water system. But since pipeline construction had began, that usage had tripled. Someone was tapping into the system upstream from the treatment plant, diverting massive amounts of water for industrial purposes. "They are stealing your water," Harold said when I showed him the charts, "and they are stupid enough to think you will never notice." The next phase involved documenting Karen's corruption and the county board's complicity in the illegal land grab. Harold taught me how to submit public records requests for meeting minutes, email communications, and financial disclosure statements. What we discovered was even worse than I had imagined. Karen owned stock in the construction company handling the pipeline project. Board Chairman Williams had received a $25,000 campaign contribution from the pipeline company just 2 weeks before my appeal was denied. The county attorney's law firm was representing the pipeline company in environmental permit applications. "This is not just corruption," Harold said, reviewing the financial records. "This is racketeering." We spent 2 weeks preparing the final elements of our strategy. Harold helped me purchase additional water monitoring equipment and showed me how to install a manual shutoff valve at the source of my spring. The valve was completely legal under my water rights, but it would give me the ability to cut off the entire downstream flow with the turn of a handle. We also set up security cameras around my property, both to document any future harassment and to record what would surely be a dramatic confrontation when I exercised my water rights. "When you turn off that valve," Harold warned me, "you are going to make some very powerful people very angry. Are you sure you are ready for what comes next?" I thought about my grandfather's promise and the 70 years of family history that Corinne and her friends were trying to steal. I thought about the threats, the harassment, and the systematic corruption that had turned my quiet county into a criminal enterprise. "I have been ready for months," I replied. "Let them come." The morning I chose to turn off the valve was crisp and clear, with that kind of bright autumn sunlight that makes everything look sharper and more defined. I had been awake since 4 o'clock, checking and double-checking my equipment, reviewing my legal documents, and preparing mentally for the confrontation that was about to unfold. Harold arrived at 6:30, carrying his briefcase and wearing the kind of serious expression that lawyers get when they know they are about to make history. We walked together to the spring, where the new shutoff valve gleamed silver against the old stone foundation my grandfather had built decades earlier. "Once you turn this," Harold said quietly, "there is no going back. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" I looked across my property, taking in the rolling hills and oak trees that had sheltered my family for 3 generations. I thought about Sheriff Corinne's threats and the county board's corruption. I thought about my grandfather's weathered hands gripping mine on his deathbed, making me promise to protect this land. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, I said. The valve turned easily, clicking into the closed position with a sound like a door locking. Within minutes, the flow from my spring slowed to a trickle, then stopped completely. Harold and I walked back to the house, where we positioned ourselves on the front porch with a clear view of the road. He opened his briefcase and arranged legal documents on the small table between our chairs. I turned on the security cameras and checked the battery levels on my recording equipment. Then we waited. The first phone call came at 8:15. My landline rang with the harsh urgency of someone who was very angry and very desperate. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Thompson," Corinne's voice barked through the receiver. "What the hell have you done to the water system?" "Good morning, Sheriff," I replied calmly. "I exercised my legal water rights this morning. Is there a problem?" "You know damn well there is a problem," she snapped. "The county treatment plant is operating at 20% capacity. The pipeline construction site has completely shut down. You need to fix this right now." "I am afraid I cannot do that," I said, watching Harold nod approvingly. "My water rights attorney has advised me that I have the absolute legal authority to control water access from my property. If the county or the pipeline company would like to negotiate usage agreements, they are welcome to contact my legal representative." The silence on the other end of the line lasted almost 30 seconds. When Corinne spoke again, her voice was lower and more menacing than I had ever heard it. "Mr. Thompson, you have no idea who you are messing with. I am coming to your property right now, and we are going to resolve this situation." "You are welcome to visit," I replied. "My attorney and I will be happy to discuss the legal aspects of water rights law with you." She hung up without another word. Corinne arrived 45 minutes later with 4 deputies and what appeared to be a county water department supervisor. They came fast, with lights flashing and sirens wailing, as if they were responding to a bank robbery instead of a civil water rights dispute. But when they reached my property line, they had to stop. Harold had researched the legal requirements for law enforcement access to private property, and he knew exactly what Corinne could and could not do without a warrant. Corinne climbed out of her patrol car with the aggressive swagger I had come to know so well, but something was different this time. Her movements were sharper, more desperate. Her mirror sunglasses could not hide the panic in her posture. "Thompson," she shouted from the edge of my driveway, "you need to come out here and fix this mess right now." Harold and I walked slowly down the driveway, taking our time and projecting the calm confidence of people who held all the cards. When we reached the property line, Harold spoke first. "Sheriff, I am Harold Westbrook, representing Mr. Thompson in all water rights matters. I assume you are here to discuss lease agreements for municipal water access." Corinne's face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical if the situation had not been so serious. Confusion, recognition, rage, and finally something approaching fear. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "He cannot just shut off the county water supply." Harold smiled and opened his briefcase. "Actually, Sheriff, under state water rights law, he absolutely can." Word of my water shutoff spread through the county faster than I thought possible. By 10 o'clock that morning, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters, county officials, and neighbors who suddenly wanted to know what was happening. The first news van arrived at 11:30, followed by 2 more before noon. I watched from my living room window as camera crews set up equipment along the public road, interviewing anyone who would talk to them about the water rights standoff that was paralyzing county operations. Harold fielded most of the media inquiries, explaining in careful legal language that Mr. Thompson was simply exercising property rights that had been established in 1952. When reporters asked about the pipeline project and Sheriff Corin's role in the dispute, Harold's responses were diplomatic but pointed. There appear to be some serious questions about the legal process that led to this situation, he told a television reporter. We believe that a thorough investigation will reveal significant irregularities in how this matter has been handled by county officials. The real breakthrough came when other property owners started contacting me directly. People I had never met called to share their own stories of harassment, intimidation, and illegal pressure tactics from Corinne and her deputies. A farmer named Rodriguez told me that Corinne had threatened to have his cattle seized for health violations unless he sold his land to the pipeline company. An elderly widow named Mrs. Chen described how deputies had searched her home without a warrant, claiming they were looking for evidence of tax evasion. Most shocking of all was the call from Tom Bradley, whose teenage son had been arrested on drug charges that Tom insisted were fabricated. They planted evidence in his car, Tom said, his voice shaking with anger. I know they did, but I could not prove it. I was so scared they would do something worse that I sold my property for half what it was worth. Each news story added another piece to the puzzle of corruption that had been operating in our county for months. Harold helped me organize the information and connect the victims with each other, creating a network of people who were finally ready to fight back. The pipeline company tried to apply pressure through intermediaries, sending lawyers and executives to negotiate with Harold while I maintained control of the water valve. But Harold had anticipated their tactics, and he was prepared for every argument they made. My client is willing to discuss reasonable compensation for water usage rights, he told them. But first, we need to address the illegal methods that were used to attempt to seize his property. Meanwhile, Corinne was becoming increasingly desperate. She made 3 more visits to my property that week, each time with more deputies and increasingly aggressive demands. But Harold's presence and the media attention had changed the dynamic completely. Corinne could no longer operate in the shadows, making threats and intimidating isolated property owners. On Thursday afternoon, she made her biggest mistake. Frustrated by her inability to force a resolution, Corinne attempted to obtain a court order requiring me to restore water access. But the judge she approached was not one of her usual allies, and he was not impressed by her legal arguments. Sheriff, Judge Martinez said during the hearing, you are asking me to override 70-year-old water rights without providing any evidence of legal justification. That is not how property law works in this state. The hearing was public, and several reporters were present to witness Corinne's humiliation. More importantly, her desperate legal maneuvering had created an official court record of the dispute, which made it much easier for state authorities to investigate the broader corruption issues. That evening, Harold called with news that changed everything. The state attorney general's office has opened a formal investigation, he said. They want to interview you about Corinne's threats and the county board's actions. For the first time in months, I felt like justice might actually be possible. The state investigators arrived on a Monday morning in November, driving unmarked cars and wearing the kind of serious expressions that make corrupt officials very nervous. They set up a temporary office in the county courthouse and began methodically reviewing every document, every meeting minute, and every financial record related to the pipeline project. Harold and I spent 4 hours with the lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Sarah Collins, who took detailed notes as I described months of harassment, threats, and illegal pressure tactics. She was particularly interested in Corinne's admission that she owned stock in the construction company and the county board's suspicious financial relationships with the pipeline developers. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Collins said as we concluded the interview, "I want you to know that your decision to fight back has probably saved other families from similar treatment. Cases like this rarely come to light because most people do not have the resources or determination to challenge corrupt officials." The investigation moved quickly once it began. Within 2 weeks, federal authorities had joined the state team, bringing additional resources and expertise in public corruption cases. They obtained warrants for Corinne's financial records, the county board's communication files, and the pipeline company's local operation records. The first arrest came on a Wednesday afternoon. Board Chairman Williams was taken into custody at his real estate office, charged with accepting bribes and conspiracy to commit fraud. The local newspaper ran his photograph on the front page, showing him in handcuffs being led to a federal vehicle. Corinne held out for another week, apparently believing that her law enforcement connections would protect her from prosecution. She was wrong about that, just like she had been wrong about so many other things. When they arrested her, it was at the sheriff's department in front of her own deputies and staff. The symbolism was intentional and devastating. The woman who had used her badge to intimidate and threaten innocent people was stripped of that authority in the most public way possible. The charges against Corinne were extensive: bribery, conspiracy, abuse of office, and violations of civil rights under federal law. The prosecutors had built an ironclad case using financial records, recorded conversations, and testimony from multiple victims who had finally found the courage to come forward. The pipeline project was suspended indefinitely, pending a complete review of all land acquisition procedures. The construction company agreed to pay substantial fines and agreed to negotiate fairly with property owners who had been coerced into selling their land below market value. Tom Bradley's son had his drug charges dismissed when prosecutors acknowledged that the evidence against him had been fabricated. Mrs. Chen received a formal apology from the county and compensation for the illegal search of her home. Rodriguez kept his farm and his cattle. As for me, I found myself in the unexpected position of having significant leverage in negotiations with both the county and the pipeline company. They needed access to my water rights, and I was finally in a position to dictate terms instead of having terms dictated to me. Harold helped me structure a deal that provided fair compensation for water usage, while including strict environmental protections and community benefit requirements. The pipeline company agreed to fund a scholarship program for local students and to hire workers from our county for construction and maintenance jobs. Most importantly, the agreement included provisions that prohibited any future attempts to use eminent domain against my property and established my family's water rights in perpetuity. On the day I finally turned the water valve back on, Harold and I stood by the spring where this whole battle had begun. The sound of water flowing again seemed louder and clearer than I remembered, as if the land itself was celebrating the return of justice. "Your grandfather would be proud," Harold said, watching the clear water bubble up from the ancient underground source. "You kept your promise to protect this land." I thought about the past year and everything that had changed. Corinne was facing 20 years in federal prison. The corrupt county board had been replaced in a special election. The pipeline project was proceeding under strict oversight with fair compensation for all affected property owners. But the most important change was in myself. I had learned that standing up to corruption, even when you feel completely alone, can inspire others to find their own courage. Sometimes one person's refusal to surrender can change an entire system. The water flowed on, just as it had for centuries before my grandfather bought this land, and just as it would for centuries after my family was gone. But now it flowed under the protection of justice, and that made all the difference.